Hello.
Oh,
Welcome to SENSESPACE.
thank you very much, Jacob. It is
Whoa.
an honor to be here. Oh. I can do my own sound effects for this one. It's nice to be here, man. Thank you.
Welcome, Mahon McCann of Mahon McCann podcast.
Woo! That's where you know me from. And
you are one of my favorite podcasters.
Dude, I appreciate it.
In the world right now.
What? So, no way. Even Joe Rogan or no?
You're up there with Joe. You're up there with Joe.
Man, appreciate it. Less of a budget. But thank you. It's been difficult the last while making them, to be honest. It's just, life gets in the way and you're busy and stuff, but stuff like that, people saying that they appreciate it and it means something to me actually makes me want to keep doing it and keep fucking having to record podcasts all the time. Actually makes it worthwhile. So I do appreciate it.
Fuck yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah, I don't find myself listening to that many podcasts right now. I've been through stretches like during the last few years where it was tons and fucking just doing hours of John Bavecki and Dialogos conversations and all of this stuff. But yeah, now I'm not tuning into that many podcasts at all for the last few weeks or month. But your one, I like to pop in and listen because it's been pretty good. And
I appreciate it. And was there anything that stuck out to you or anything that was, maybe get us into this next conversation, whatever it is?
Yeah, well, first of all, your conversation with your dad was awesome.
He's an interesting guy, isn't he? Like he's for some context for people listening as well. He's so he's a 5th Dan black belt in ninjutsu, which is the system that I train in, and then he's black belt in karate and kung fu as well. And he's trained in like boxing, Thai boxing, trained in Japan, trained with the sword and all these kind of different. So he's just always been involved in martial arts. It's crazy. Like he's really he's a proper, like, I was going to say a wizard, but I don't know if that's like the highest level but he's definitely mastered it anyway. So it's interesting to kind of hear his thoughts on it and how he kind of, thinks about it. Pretty crazy.
It's fucking crazy. Like,
See, it's normal for me because I grew up like in my house when we grew up, it was like martial arts were like religion. Like it was like you didn't go to church on Sunday, like you went training on Friday, Saturday morning. And that was kind of like the tradition, I suppose, like a weird Irish ninja kind of thing.
Your dad's like the Mr. Miyagi
of Belfast. Yeah, he inspires me a lot in that way in terms of like martial arts. He also writes as well. So he writes like screenplays and stuff about Irish history mostly. A lot of kind of heavy historical stuff. So I would have got a lot of those interests from him in my own writing and like from martial arts and stuff, kind of inherited them. Although we do things very differently, but big source of inspiration for me.
Yeah. I want to like get into some of the things that you talked about in that podcast as well. Cause your dad is deep into the wisdom of something there. And I was like, whoa, like, wisdom energy was coming through when I was listening. But I wanted to ask you before that, like, obviously, it sounds like you kind of from a lineage, like we're all from lineages. Like, we all have certain characteristics of people in our family that then shape us and inform us. But
for sure,
I remember you did a podcast with another Irish friend about cultural history of Ireland, and you guys were swapping stories about your grandparents, and I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so that particular story, that actually wasn't my dad's dad, that was my mom's dad. So that was on her side of the family, because my dad's from the north of Ireland where I live, which has a very different history and a very different kind of like story to my mum's side is down south. But her great grandfather, they were all kind of sailors and like they went to sea a lot. And he was a man called John Carley, and he wasn't like a pirate, but he was kind of like at the time, I can't remember what the name was, but they were kind of like fishermen, but also like lived out at sea. And he was shipwrecked 3 times in his life. It was like the craziest story. There's a documentary about it on RTE down south in Dublin. Like, it was called the Lismore, was the name of the boat. And it was 19 people on it, and 18 of them died. And he was the only one that survived. And it was filled with cattle and everything. I remember in the story. It's like all the cattle were drowning and dying, and he was just like out in the sea at night. And he survived by sailing himself back to Ireland with a shirt, standing on a piece of driftwood for over like 24 hours out at sea, to get back to Ireland. Like, but this was during the Civil War. So when he got to Ireland, the Civil War was happening when people wanted to be part of England, or had signed the Anglo-Irish Treaty for Ireland to be, for the north of Ireland to stay part of England and for the south to be free. And so they were all fighting each other. So he came ashore in this, but he was like stripped naked basically because he'd been out at sea. And nobody would help him because they all thought he was in the IRA or something. And so he just had to run around basically naked until he found the police, and then got returned to his family. But it was like a big tragedy at the time. It changed a lot of like safety regulations in Ireland randomly about boats and about lifeboats, because there was no lifeboats on board. And he was, just random shit. But cool story about, and he was all actually another, if I'm not going on about this too much, but he was born with a caul, which is where you're born with the amniotic sac on your face as a baby. And in Ireland, they say if you're born with a caul, you can't die at sea, which he really like followed through. It's like kind of mystical kind of thing. If you have like the womb still on you,
like you're inside the sac.
Yeah, it's like it's still, it doesn't, it didn't break properly or something while he was being born. But apparently in like ancient Irish tradition, that means you'll never drown. And he definitely didn't drown. So it was pretty impressive, like interesting guy.
Yeah. Seriously. I've been reading Homer for the first time, and I haven't read any of the Greeks, but like Odysseus in Homer is like gets lost at sea and has to like swim for 3 days. So it's pretty legendary stuff that's happening.
Yeah, man, I wouldn't want to do it, to be honest. Like, I'd be pretty out in like open ocean in the water and stuff. Like, nah, I wouldn't be a big fan. But I mean, tough, I suppose. I think he was a bit wary of the ocean after it. I don't know if he went back out to sea and all that, but tough life as well, man. Like, I know last time we were talking about like intergenerational trauma and stuff, and that kind of the effect. I feel like Ireland is a serious place for that. Like, Ireland's changed so much in like such a short space of time that it was like a third world country in the 1950s. Like, it wasn't, anywhere near. So like in a couple of generations, it's gone from like this dude who fucking was out at sea all the time to me just sitting here on the internet. Like, it's kind of this massive transition.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, like, the possibility of adventure or like just really novel, surprising things happening in life. Something about like the internet sort of has made it feel like that's less likely. But I wonder if it is actually.
I think
like reality is like that, and we can actually have those kinds of experiences just end up happening to us.
Yeah, the serendipity. I mean, I don't know if they get shipwrecked as often, probably not. But that's a good. I mean, because I suppose things have gotten safer in a sense that I was listening to a podcast the other day with Ryan Holiday and Robert Greene, because Robert Greene's just written a new book, The Daily Laws, that he was promoting. And they were talking about courage, and he was saying that in past generations, it seemed like they had a lot more courage. When he reads about like people from the past, like, ancient kind of, or not ancient, I suppose, like Napoleon or like big figures of history, they had to do these crazy things. And we're kind of like insulated from that a lot. And I don't know if maybe you can, I think there is opportunities for courage, but maybe the risk is less. It's not your life all the time. like your life's really not that much at stake generally, I suppose. I don't know if that makes any sense, but do you think people were more courageous maybe in past generations than we are?
I think that courage maybe is actually just like a property of human experience, but that we have been like cut off from it, and that
Whoa.
maybe it needs like it's like a relational thing. Like you need the challenge, but you also need to be called forth into
Yeah,
it or something.
to go towards it in a sense. That's really, did a Dialogos a few weeks ago on courage, and we talked about it and like trying to figure out, what does courage mean? Where does it come from? And I was trying to figure out like what's the smallest unit of courage? Like, is it what you think? Is it what you say? Is it your actions? Like, where does it kind of start? And it kind of came down to that it was like almost a matter of existing over not existing, or just like actually choosing to be aware, or choosing to be, present in a sense over not present. And we'd really kind of, but it's so, yeah, I don't know. I think there's probably as much opportunity to exercise courage as ever, I think. But whether or not we do, I don't really know.
Yeah, that clicks in a lot with something called infinitesimal courage.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I've never heard of that.
I
It's
think
cool.
I heard it from Jordan Hall. I don't know if he came up with it or someone else,
Yeah.
but me and a couple other people that I speak with just picked it up and
Yeah.
been running with
Sick.
it. And it's very much that notion of like the very, very tiny like moment in a conversation where you could say something more convenient or you could
That's
say something more true.
so fascinating. That's exactly what we were like came down to, in a sense that it was like there's something in my head that I can say that's safe, or that feels like predictable. And then there's another thing that's just like a wild card. And that's kind of like that's kind of the bit of courage, at least in conversation, that we kind of picked up on. So that was Jordan Hall, was it? In terms of that's whoa,
Yeah,
interesting.
he's a
Some
real
convergence.
he's a real wise dude,
Yeah, I've seen some of his
leader
stuff.
of our times. He flies quite under the radar, I feel, but he's got a huge impact.
Yeah, I've seen some of his stuff with Vervaeke and with Rebel Wisdom. Yeah, Rebel Wisdom on their channel. Um, but it is, I mean, the intergenerational thing is interesting, talking about like fathers. I saw you did a podcast as well with your dad. I've been meaning to listen to it. Really interesting that it comes up on my podcast all the time. Like I did one last night with a friend of mine who's an actor, an Irish actor, and his dad was an actor, and talking about his dad encouraging him to be an actor and stuff. And it's such a, like, you don't really hear it that much. I end up talking about it all the time, but I don't, it's not like common parlance in our culture to talk about a lot. And there's so much like issues with fatherlessness. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Warren Farrell's work, The Boy Crisis, the crisis of fatherlessness. I mean, in the UK, there's like 2 million homes without fathers in them. And there's like tons of research on fathers' roles in developing empathy, postponing gratification, social skills, just he lists out in The Boy Crisis 70 different things that fathers contribute to kids. But it kind of goes, I don't know, flies under the radar a bit. Do you think would you agree?
Yes, I would. Yeah. And yeah, that feels very true to me. I think the role of the father is huge. I think obviously the absence of the father is
Yeah.
enormous. And I've been in relationship with lots of people in my life who either had an absent father
Yeah.
or had a father who was present but somehow absent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that has massive consequences for like how you develop, how you relate, what you look for, and
Yeah.
in a man and all of that. So
yeah, that's such a, like, even to go like that role model figure that you can kind of end up, because I had a bit of that and I had trouble growing up and stuff, and things in my family that weren't good. And you know, I would have had a very good relationship with my dad and also a very bad one at times. And I can see how that shaped my choices and who I hung around with and what we did and getting into trouble. And you kind of look for it in other places almost. I think it's such a pertinent relationship that you can't really just ignore it or just do without. Um, what did you and your dad talk about in the podcast?
He's written a book recently about leaving the church and like all
Oh,
of the
yeah.
his counter narrative against church as sort of the idea of like Jesus and God is only accessible in this
Mm-hmm.
building or in this community, and
Mm-hmm.
that it stunts a lot of people's development. So it's sort of about that.
Mm.
But yeah, we were just kind of talking about um, finding spirituality, I guess, in the absence of all of that. And
That's a serious topic, man. Something similar to what we spoke about in the last podcast we did, I suppose. Also, that kind of being outside of the church. I grew up as an atheist, so I know I wasn't ever in the church, but I can kind of see, the absence of it or the need for something like that. And was your dad uh, very involved with the church, or was he kind of
yeah, he
just?
got in when he was like 18 or 19, and then was like quite involved until, I don't know, 10 years later or something. So
Yeah.
yeah, he was sort of a Christian youth worker, did
Mm-hmm.
dabbled in Christian missionary stuff, and
Wow.
was sort of a minister type. But
Mm-hmm.
effectively, he was a sort of intuitive empath type,
Mm-hmm.
wounded healer archetype. So
Yep. Mm-hmm.
he's got like this weird thing of like lock on to someone in a public space that he's
Yeah.
never spoken to before, and then he'll feel some compulsion to share something or say something to them, almost like
Yeah.
a muse or something. But
Yeah.
obviously, with my family growing up and my mom, we just felt like, oh, it's like his ADD, like compulsion, like he's always like,
Yeah.
like the way he's engaging is sort of inviting in the weirdos or
Oh yeah, okay.
troubled
So he's
people like want to
yeah.
talk to him.
Well, I mean, Christian missionary work, that's kind of what you're doing, isn't it? Like he wasn't hanging around with the cool people. Like he was like everybody's kind of accepted it. That's it. But like, how does he? So, I mean, is he taking it that he's got his religion outside of the organizational framework? I suppose he's kind of taking it on his own.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. But he doesn't. It's even though he left, it's still a very ingrained part of his like way of telling story and like speaking about spirituality and his frames of reference, and
Mm.
like the natural intuition for him would be to pray for people for a while, but over the
Yeah.
years he's been able to like figure out how to show up with people not in a Christian,
Yeah.
explicitly Christian way. And that was like a big part of like, yeah, because I became super atheist in my
Yeah.
teens, and so we didn't really click at that level at all.
Interesting. So you had some beef over it, and then now you've kind of ended up on the other side, maybe.
We're starting to get to the other side. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
getting to
Interesting.
like common language again. It's pretty cool.
That's really cool, man. Yeah, I had, because like I was such a diehard atheist. I think we talked about that when we were younger. Like I was real like militant, like would have such an argument with anybody if they said they believe in Jesus, or be like properly refuse to take a Bible in school and everything. And now I've been thinking about getting baptized, being honest. I don't know if I will, but I've kind of, I guess I've wrestled with it for a long time. Like, and I have come to appreciate the fundamental truths of it. The kind of basic, like finding evil in yourself rather than outside yourself, and the kind of imitating the path of redemption. This kind of that it has a way of being in it that we actually need to tap into now. And I wonder if you have to join the church to do that. So I guess this conversation could be very useful for me. I really need to listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
But
well, it was a pretty short podcast. I feel like we were just exploring the waters. I'll maybe sort of do some deeper dives with him later, but yeah, that question sort of, okay, so this sort of is now fitting in very neatly with my life's mission right now and my work, which is somewhere between right now men's work and transformative dialogue. And I see that like transformative dialogue as a sort of distributed context in which spirit can begin to be known between people.
Yes, 100%. And that's almost a quasi-religious thing without the church bit. That's really interesting. Me and my dad had a conversation on that exact topic, talking about logos and because that obviously the kind of geist, the spirit between you in conversation was where I found that. But he was talking about it in terms of fighting. So he was talking about like he's been in a lot of street fights because he worked as a bouncer for a long time. And so he'd been in hundreds of street fights every year, like caught like tons of them. And he said he got so good at it that he could know like before a fight would start how it was going to happen. And he just like would just step into it. But the way he described it, I was like, that's kind of like, the logos, like in a conversation, whenever that flow state is happening, you're not really doing it. You're not like consciously aware of it. And it's just kind of, there's a third creative element. And he was talking about that in terms of martial arts, which I thought was a really strange kind of convergence. I've spoken about it a few times since, but just that experience of something other than your individual conscience that can happen in the interaction. Do you think that that's kind of the foundations of something else? Like I don't know if you have an organized version of that, like, or is it always just going to be in the ether?
I think there may be a way in which there's like a relationship between culture and creed or organization, and we may be in a position where we have institutions that grew out of culture, but then culture has changed and the institutions and the creeds, the ways of organizing and speaking about things and understanding things no longer match with the underlying culture. So
100%.
Naturally, things will flow out of the culture, and the culture, I think, will be cultivated through the practices, through the ways of relating, through the art making and so forth. And then out of that creates the people. The people are created through it, and then they will go and create things.
Create new institutions, though. I wonder, because I have so much Jordan Peterson in my brain right now. It's just flying around with like the issue between like the dogma and the creative spirit, and that the church is the dogma that enforces the rules at all cost, and then the creative spirit is like the thing that revitalizes that dogma, that comes back and kind of reshapes it. And it's kind of the true spirit of the thing, but it doesn't follow the rules exactly. It's like it breaks the rules, but in the spirit of the rules, if that makes any sense. So like the institution, the dogmatic church, has gotten so out of touch with everything and kind of just doesn't seem to be adapting. So it's like the spirit needs to evolve to reshape it, or to kind of, bring it back into context. I think we see that happening as well, like with the rise of a lot of the kind of tribalism and stuff like that. We start to see the advantage of having a unifying story, the advantage of having a philosophy that says locate evil in yourself, not in other groups or not in other people. You start to see the utility of the wisdom that we just kind of casually threw out because the church was outdated. So that's what I struggle with, is like, how do you, can you do it on your own? Like, are we competent enough to do that? Or at some point you have to say, I don't really know, and I might just have to follow the rules to a certain extent, because, you know, I've been wrong about loads of other things. So yeah, that's kind of, will I get baptized? Won't I? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a really interesting
Yeah.
sort of place to pick it up.
Yeah.
And yeah, the first thing that comes up for me is I do have a sense that there's a kind of generation of Irish people of our generation
Yeah.
who are very much of the same spirit that I'm feeling from you, of like, there is something really substantial here that's been disconnected from, and actually it's kind of our part of our like becoming or destiny is to sort of go back into and really find the gold.
That's cool, man. Yeah, that's about right. Like, but I need, yeah, because Irish culture particularly was very religious society, or very Catholic, and a lot of older Irish people I've talked to from kind of previous generations and stuff, even they've moved away from the church, but they're more reluctant just to throw it out. In a sense, they're kind of like, you can't just get rid of the whole of history. Like, this has been like, this is what made Ireland. This is all like, it's baked into the fabric of it. So you can't just like be, hey, we're done with that, see you later. We're just get rid of the churches, it'll be fine. But like, every single town in Ireland has a church. You turn around every corner, there's a church there. Like, it's such a part of our culture that, you know, what's left when you start to get rid of it, and it gets a bit, but I think everybody's facing that. I think that's maybe a generational thing in the West, probably not just specifically in Ireland, but and that it requires us then to look for something, you know, some fad, something that's kind of new age and cool, or something that's, you know, it could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be, you know, status, whatever it is. You just kind of, you need that way of being. Like, it's not optional. So yeah, which is the best one, or which is the one that, you know, yeah, which is the one that we should be following, I suppose, is something I'm thinking about.
I'm getting an interesting notion, just as you say that like, somehow the absence of a spiritual relationship to reality could be something that intrinsically gives rise to addictive behaviors, because it might be a fundamental need that's not met.
That's missing. And what was it, Daniel Schmachtenberger, that reminded me, he said something like, it's very hard to measure public psychological health, but one way of measuring it would be, it's the opposite of the amount of addiction in society. So you could measure how bad the psychological health of the society is by how much addiction there is. And I would say the number of addictions we can have these days is just multiplying out of control. But that's an interesting point. I mean, what happens, you know, the question of how to live is a fundamental question. And it's not even like what Peterson points out about values. Like, values aren't just, you know, oh, I believe in this. It's to do with how you see. It's to do with how you, you know, act in reality. It's to do with how your salience works, how your prioritization, how you pay attention to things. It's so fundamental to us being able to live and act that you can't actually not answer those questions. You can just answer them badly, or, you know, or you can put a bit of effort into it. But yeah, I think his argument anyway would be that you can't, without the right one, you're going to have this existential confusion always. Because it's fundamental to perception. It's fundamental to action. You need a value system to even see. So, you know,
does this feel like a big sort of transitional, like, do you feel like you're sort of on the edge between the two places of like,
metaphorically
deeply skeptical and like somehow ready to embrace something as well?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I suppose I'm more skeptical of my own skepticism because I was very skeptical when I was younger, like rampantly skeptical, and question everything. But I kind of realized then your ability to question things is also limited, and it's not particularly, Vervaeke's point of view, that we're not particularly well adapted for truth, like capital T truth, and with relevance realization, we're self-deceptive. The tools we use to perceive reality also make us self-deceptive to most of the things going on. So yeah, if you're gonna pick, I don't know where I was going with that, but you need, I've lost a certain sense of confidence in that ability to make something new. I mean, I'm a pretty creative guy and I do a lot of creative stuff, but I don't know how competent we are to just make up a new thing, certainly that I'm not anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm feeling the presence of the Metaverse video somewhere in the background here. It's just like,
man,
no, that is
I'm actually
not where we want to go.
well, actually, I suppose that might be an interesting segue because I'm actually working at the moment, content and copywriting with a company called Tech Circus, which is a UK events company, and we're doing an event called Enter the Metaverse next month. So I have been like submerged in metaverse content. And I know the stuff with Mark Zuckerberg and stuff. I think that's an attempt for Facebook, I think, to own the metaverse or to own what it's going to be so that they have the big stake in it, which might help drive the technology. But there's kind of an arms race between this like Web3 metaverse, which is decentralized and open-ended and built by users, and then another one that's centralized and ran kind of by a single authority. And I think that's kind of an interesting where the culture is going. I mean, that seems to be where all the money's going anyway. So that's kind of, it's being pushed that way to this new technological kind of world. The philosophical behind that is kind of a different thing. I mean, the meaning crisis, we talk about that a lot with Vervaeke, and on what level that is driving the need for technological revolution to try and stem the feelings of purposelessness or a mode of being that isn't satisfying. I think that's part of it, but also that it might offer some solutions to some of it, strangely. Sorry, I think I just left you with nothing to work with there. But
so the complete opposite. We're covering a lot of terrain.
Yeah,
I'm still hearing your dad's voice, your dad's accent saying logos in my head, which is exciting. It's a conversation I would like to have witnessed.
Man, we'll do more anyway. There's more coming, but
yeah. So I wanted to take a few steps back, and there was a couple of things about the church I wanted to bring through that felt important.
Yep.
Because you spoke something important about not just creating something new, and I felt in that there was like the new thing is somehow cut off from the old thing. And I feel that you're like, not just you, but like an entire generation that move into total deconstruction, total criticism, total reaction is completely natural, when the previous mode was you can't question anything. It's just the way that it is. No one's ever really questioned it. And something about that attitude gave rise to so much evil or so much corruption occurred in schools, in churches, and I don't know what the full implication, whether that just means that that's what society was and the church wasn't any better, or whether it was that something about you cannot question this thing and it's holy, and the power involved in that was somehow part of it. So just presencing the evil, because I feel it is like all of those kids that were abused and
and
that fucked
systemically
people up
abused.
big time.
And that they didn't really do anything about it, and that it was never. Well, that was always, I suppose. That's kind of a fatal blow, isn't it? Really, that you just can't really come back from having allowed multitudes of people to systemically abuse children and then just move them around and not actually address it or do. The corruption in the church is something that's kind of brought about its downfall, really. And maybe that isn't redeemable, or it isn't. Maybe that's why religions had to move outside of it, because it became so corrupted. But then there's another side of that, which is you can't just remove authority completely. Like that kind of teacherly authority. Like I think my generation and the current kind of zeitgeist kind of fetishizes the dark parts of authority. Always, it's always the abuses of power. It's always the abuses of authority. Whereas there's actually good ways for people to be authorities if people are very good at what they do, or if they're, a teacher that's advancing you and that cares about you. And like that isn't talked about as much, I suppose, the mentorship angle of it, and that there's that I don't know how you reconcile those two things. The abuse is unforgivable, but then also we need some authority. As individuals and as a society, there has to be some sort of, I guess,
there's a kind of I absolutely think that for us it's necessary to be moving from rejection of and into like a more natural claiming of authority, because I feel like it is something like that we personally have to claim as men as well. Like that's where ultimately rest is, like you in your home, or you with your like infinitesimal courage and different decisions, taking up responsibility.
Yes, that's a really interesting link there, the courage and the authority and responsibility as well, because I think part of the problem with the cultural kind of rejection of it is also that you reject authority and reject power and you say that they're bad things, but also part of a person's development into a responsible, mature person is becoming authoritative. It's becoming being able to be, responsible and to be competent and to take charge of things. That's what adults do, as far as I was aware. So is that part of the developmental crisis that we have, that you can't, that authority is seen as only a bad thing because it's been abused in the past, because it's always abused. Authority is universally probably used poorly, but it's still used good some of the time, and enough to justify, I would say, the need for authority, but also the need for criticism of authority, and also justice, or whatever the counterbalance is. I don't know.
I'm just sinking into the edge of the silence here, because I feel like I want to just drop into it a little bit and see if any deeper threads want to come through. I like to do weird shit like this on SENSESPACE to,
nice. I like it.
Some dimensional walls of what might be expected on a podcast.
Well, listen, man, I'm all into it. We get some 4D going. Sounds good. Get it into the inner metaverse, possibly.
Yeah. These threads feel very, very alive for me. Doing a men's initiative that started recently. Going from a men's group that I sort of stepped into leading to like starting a new one and having people show up for that. And that has really forced me to think about these male initiatory questions, because I feel like
that's where we started as well. The fathers, the sons, there's
exactly,
it's kind of a bit of an alignment there. And I actually did a men's group recently, the first men's gathering I ever did with the Men's Development Network in Waterford. And it was with, I was like the youngest, it was all like men that were like 60 and 70 and complete strangers. Like I never met them before. We did it on Zoom. And like within 20 minutes, I'd say I was crying. Like it was just so like the connection and just the honesty was really just like, because they're kind of guys you'd see on the street, like guys with like big scraggly beards and like you look like bikers and stuff, and you'd be like, you wouldn't think, you wouldn't be able to imagine past, how they look or how that they're just like a middle-aged man or something. And then the depth of their lives and their struggles with their children and with their, purpose and with, it was just like, just shocked me completely to be like, you can't assume anything. Like the depth of suffering that some men experience and that we're all going through is just, I see why people avoid it, because it's hard to, I do, because it's something you're not prepared for, I think, really. And I wonder, do you experience that in your men's gatherings, like the kind of peering behind the veil?
Ooh. Oh, peering behind the veil. I don't feel I've had that precise kind of experience, though I did on men's retreat that I went on. I think there's been like some like touching moments over the course of like a 10-week, the previous group that I did, where, well, you kind of like, you cultivate a container together. So it's different to just like 3 or 4 guys on a call once. It's like the quality of doing it every fortnight for a set period of time means that it gets its own integrity. And so then you kind of sink into this thing that's already established. Mm-hmm. And then that's where it can get to a place where somebody comes in like feeling like really out of whack, and then like the prowess of the group can somehow bring like truth to light in a way that sort of helps to liberate that person from whatever state they're in, or like to confront, even if there's like something that wants to be confronted, like that kind of thing.
It's crazy how problems like that have like that you can confront them that way. Or that was something I noticed as well during that men's work, also during the Dialogo stuff that I've done, like how those kind of, I don't know, they're like feelings or something, but how you can sense them and you're out of whack, because that's kind of like a spatial metaphor, that you feel out of alignment, or that you're like, you're not centered, or there's something holding you back, which is another metaphor that you can then express verbally to people in this kind of safe container, which was very important. That was something that was spoken about. Really interesting to see, being like, a big group of men saying, be gentle. And this is kind of encouraging that, like, you just felt safe. Like you knew you could say whatever it is that you had to say. And that allowed people to say it. Because maybe that was the cool thing about the men's group that I really felt, was like, there was that acceptance. And amongst men that maybe, I mean, I try to act that way, but also, we can be maybe a bit brutal with each other sometimes. You don't have that accepting environment always. And is that something in your men's group that's a feature?
Yeah, definitely. And well, I've just started the new one. It's going to be 2 groups. I'm doing 2 groups in 2 time zones. So I'm going to be doing one every weekend. Yeah, I'm really fucking excited about it. And it feels like the last group was much more about just like practicing dialogos, transformative dialogue space, getting that we space established, and just like moving through it. But now with this one, at least in the first call, it feels like there's much more of a sense of like the external world. Like I had sort of tried to bring in like world problems a little bit, and to be like, this is why what we're doing here is actually really important. And now it's starting to feel like the meta crisis, or just like the sense of shit's out of control. And there's a sense that what we're doing together as men is like tuning in to a deep primordial sense making, communicative, attuning sort of capacity, and that's actually, that sort of creates reality in a certain sense. Like whether there's chaos or not, if there are men present who are like in their bodies, in their intuition, ready to just figure things out, that makes reality so much more navigatable, especially in a crisis.
That's so that maps on exactly to my own feelings about it, I think. And something about dialogos also, that transformative kind of conversation that you come out the other side feeling healed, or it's something in the podcast. I get that as well. Like when you manage to get into that flow state and the geist, and you feel a sense of, just the things that are coming up are the things that you're saying, and there's no kind of big gap between your thinking and your words, and that there's a flow to it. That seems to be the antidote to so much, to so many, I suppose, of the disconnection.
Yeah, beautiful.
And it kind of scales a bit, but that's why I'm interested in the metaverse thing, because if you had this 3-dimensional technology whereby you could render other people, because like Zoom is actually pretty good for it. I mean, the course we did in Dialogos worked great over Zoom, and you can do it with people all over the world. So if you had a better version of that with people actually in a room, you could really start to create the communities and the cultures that would bring that to another level. And I mean, you can do it in person, but the scale is the thing that I guess is an issue. But that's what excites me about the metaverse, is the solutions to potentially some of those meaning crises, and crises of education, of connection, of work, of if it doesn't devolve into Mark Zuckerberg's fucking Wii Sports world. I don't know if that's going to be like probably, but yeah, I think it's so true what you're saying. Like that's where I think the answer is in there somewhere. That feeling of connection. And I never felt that as a young guy at all, like until I was much older. Like I felt very disconnected and very angry and resentful, insecure, just doing crazy shit to try and be the cool guy, try and be the man all the time, not really, being able to speak honestly about myself. Which is it's kind of a trope, like, guys don't talk about their feelings or whatever, but it wasn't just talking about your feelings. It was being able to, be present and to be, as you've said, in your body. Is that something men struggle with when they first come to you? Like, can they just, or do they feel like they're, can they feel?
Yeah, well, just to say that I also was massively stunted and pretty muted, I would say. I was like autistically sort of muted. So
yeah,
even when I got into my sensitivity, there was still like this thing of just like I would almost become an observer rather than a participant in a certain kind of way. So
like an abstract, I always felt like an abstract concept, like rather than like a boy, or like I was like an abstract concept in a boy's body. Which is interesting because like that observer, the effect of being like third person almost,
yeah, well, that can also be, that can become a sort of disassociative as well. But what you said about the flow being healing is like one of the most beautiful, true, lived experiences I've had over the last several years, where this practice, Dialogos, has been like one of the main things for me, because I think it's almost that simple. It's the move from stuckness into flow. but I do get a lot of people come in with, I think there's a general acceleration in the culture that kind of takes hold, and it takes hold of me from time to time as well, where I'm just like continuously future oriented. But that eventually, like, if I tune into my gut, like my gut is like, I've become much more sensitized to it over the years with psychedelics and everything. And so I can sort of feel it in my gut. Am I moving too quickly? And it's not like moving as such, it's moving in my brain. So I can have this experience of like, oh, fuck, my mind's like thinking about the next thing, having all these great ideas, da 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 da.
Yeah.
When what's actually needed is for me to like rest and not do anything.
Yeah, I have a big problem with that, man. I like want to do everything and just get like run myself into the ground, basically trying to do like tons of different stuff. But it reminded me, I just because like obviously didn't have that awareness for a very long time, and I went to Cuba to box with the Cubans, and I went with my boxing club at the time. We like built a ring for them and hung out and became friends and stuff in Cuba. But the type of training, like they wouldn't even let us wear boxing gloves or anything. Like they wouldn't let us. I'd been boxing for years. Like I know what I'm doing, and they just made us walk for 2 weeks. Just like walk backwards and forwards, like just doing footwork. Like it was. I was so annoyed to do it. Like so, my ego was just like, "Fuck this!" Like I know what I'm doing. Why are they treating me like a baby? Like I'm learning how to walk constantly, like in a boxing stance. And for 2 weeks, and I didn't get it, but it changed. Well, I just decided, I was like, I'm just going to commit myself to this. And I'm going to do it 100%. I'm just going to do what they tell me to do. I'm just going to do it. And something really changed for me. And it was that connection to other bits of my body that I didn't have a connection to. I felt like for the first time, my mind wasn't up here. It was in my hips and it was in my legs and it was lower. And as a result, I was calmer and I was more intuitive and less kind of reactive. I didn't have the constant inner monologue. I mean, the 5 hours of training in the Cuban heat probably helped, but it caused a profound change, I think, in my consciousness. It trained me to put my consciousness in my body and to feel my body rather than just it all going on in my mind. I think that kind of embodiment is something that's missing from the education system and from our kind of current model of, knowledge and development. And that's why it's interesting, like, to do that in men's groups, because I think that's kind of where I picked up a lot of it, is martial arts and dialogos. It's like, if you could just find a way to turn that into a curriculum for people, it could be like, you could sort out a lot of these problems, I think.
Yeah.
That'd be fucking pretty cool.
And I think it can be taught, but I don't know that there's a curriculum as such. I think it's just like with martial arts, like be with the master and participate with them, and
and
all the little things, and
that you have to, I suppose it's a lot of discipline, like it's a lot of commitment, and it's a lot of doing stuff that isn't going to be fun, isn't going to feel good, and is going to be, eventually rewarding, but in a way that you probably can't imagine or understand, because it'll change you as a person. So you don't know who you're going to change into. And that's kind of how do you pitch that to people without authority, without, teacherly authority, like what Zach Stein talks about, without that teacherly authority, how do you get people to that level? Like, because I wouldn't have gotten there if it wasn't for that kind of willingness to take part.
Yeah, there's definitely like a need for, like, it seems that teacherly authority requires integrity.
Yeah.
And like it's like the meeting of authority and integrity or something like that. Like, people are naturally, during the course of their lives, whatever experiences they've had, gonna step into some sort of personhood that is proportional to the life that they've led. But if they're not actually in integrity with it, like if you have a lot of power but you don't have like the balance or integrity, then that's obviously going to be having effects on your
and then you have to exercise it in like a bureaucratic kind of way. That's what in that Zach Stein talks about in the Education at a Time Between Worlds, that the kind of schooling power is just bureaucratic authority. Like you're in a system, so you have to subscribe to the teacher. Whereas with martial arts, it's very different. Like your relationship with your coach or your teacher is a relationship of respect, and it's like, you know, they say jump, you jump, and that's what you do. And I always found it such a contrast between martial arts and school, which is so like, maybe you like a teacher, but a lot of the time you're just doing it because you're in the system and that's what you do. Whereas true teaching, I think, isn't like that. It's like, you know, it's more respect based because of integrity, like what you're saying. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but
this logos of fighting then that you spoke about with your
the logos of combat.
Like there was a beautiful story that your dad told, and it was like so vivid in my head. Like I can still remember when I was listening to it. He was talking about that fight in Dublin town centre,
which he witnessed. Yes.
The chi that was flowing.
Yes. Yeah. That's what he talks about. Like the moment of, like, before the fight starts, an awareness of kind of, he calls it his zero, but like he talked about it in other ways as like a perfect, he wrote an article for me before and he said like it's like a perfect moment sent from God where you're like on the edge of, you know, it's like jumping off a cliff. Like there's no going back. There's no half measures here. Like this is, you either completely commit yourself to this or you're going to die. And that's, I guess, what we're talking about. Like the previous kind of attitude where it was like, this is it. This is, you know, there is nothing after this. And he thinks about it like a zero where he's not thinking, he's feeling and perceiving, but on a subconscious level, and then just ready to go like that. Bam. As soon as it starts, boom, gone straight away into action. And there's no like consciousness. And that's what he tries to train in ninjutsu, in fighting. But I guess my life, I don't really fight that much. So it's not like that. It's not, I don't look at it in that way. I'm trying to apply it in like a meaningful way, or a way that like makes your life more connected and like, you know, like the flow state, really.
Yeah, but when you're speaking about it, I just feel like the excitement coming up inside of me. Like there's something about that is so like fundamental to the barrier that I'm trying to break through in my development as a man.
Oh yeah. You need to do some fighting, man. You got to get in there. You got to start. You could join my old boxing clubs in Berlin, Roder Stern Berlin, Red Star Boxing. My coach Ola was there, and Kazim, and all the guys. And yeah, it's a great boxing club, man.
Well, I'll have to find some martial arts in Berchtesgaden.
Bavarian martial arts. But
I feel like this fire can still come through in different modes. Whether it's like spitting on a microphone over music, or in a dialogue. In the context of the men's group, that's part of why I'm loving it and why I'm showing up for it, is because it feels like this isn't just a continuation of the last group. This is like, how can I be even more fully here now with the increased responsibility? And I feel myself just craving those like live edge spaces where that thing that makes me nervous on the edge is going to be the thing that puts me into the like I've jumped off the cliff, like there's no turning back.
And that's an interesting hunger though, because I suppose I feel exactly the same way, where I'm putting myself in situations more and more now where it is that kind of experience, and you get more, I guess maybe it's the novelty of it or something, where it's like the challenges that used to be challenges, that used to feel like jumping off cliffs, aren't the same anymore. And they've kind of moved to other areas that, like when I was younger, like I would have been terrified of, like to try and do a podcast like this, like, you know, 8 years ago or something. I would have been like, all red faced and like stumbling. Like, oh. So the frontier moves forward, but like you kind of, it's very meaningful, I think, to pursue that, to keep going. And that's really makes a big difference in your life. The courage thing, if you actually look for that frontier all the time and look for where it is in your life and pursue it. And it's maybe we're kind of far away from it in the digital world where we can avoid those kind of jumping off cliff moments, but you have to kind of push yourself towards them, to find, to seek them out, and to kind of get involved with them. So it's interesting that you feel that way also. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I fucking feel it big time.
Yeah, sick, man.
One of the huge things for me recently was like sometimes you think you've jumped off the cliff, but a part of you has still very much not jumped off. And it's realizing what that part is. And for me, that was like a very, like, not being fully financially independent, not having like completely let go of getting help from others with my finances. I realized like, oh, there's this like deep like fear, you know, money trauma, abandonment thing. Like if I get in touch with that, you know, I thought there was just all these negative emotions that would come up in relation to it. But once I got down into it, it was like, oh, this is like the primal fire that I needed. And now I'm actually connecting, you know, all of this work, all of this craft that I've built, all of these ideas, that they're actually starting to rest in my deepest need as a man. Which is to fucking survive and provide, and like actually be connected with that is waking me up in the morning, and I'm just like fucking like the energy's there and I'm ready to do stuff.
That's it, man. That's, I can feel the energy from you. You're fired up. That's serious. And how did it present itself? Like, how did you realize that there was this hang up about it, or how did it like, because you obviously weren't thinking about it. So did you have to kind of go, oh, you know, what's this? Or were you...
In hindsight, I would say it was subconscious, because I have started this dialogic practice like at the beginning of the year, done all this stuff, gotten clients and so forth. But it was like, I was still getting support from my fiance. I was still like, we were still sort of in that, and it wasn't clear like, okay, when's gonna be go time? And I realized like my service, my practice, my business was not really at the heart of me, and therefore it wasn't showing up in my actual creations and my website, and it was still sort of marginal. And now I'm like bringing it in to the middle, to the center, and it's like, oh, this work is actually the thing that nourishes me and is gonna make my life so much better when I can actually do it with more people. So I've fucking like redone my entire website. I've been doing a lot of work to make it more accessible to more people, so that I can literally be of service to the widest pool of people possible. And be really busy doing this practice
and spreading the good word. That's really interesting. I mean, I kind of, because I've been doing a lot of this online stuff as well, it's been an interesting journey, kind of like putting myself out there and starting this stuff and a website and blog and that kind of stuff, and seeing the failures, I think, of the stuff that went wrong, or the stuff that I was like, maybe this is it, or like, no, that's not it. And like seeing them come together into something more. And then you go, oh, okay, that actually just wasn't meant to be that. That was kind of just like, you know, what I thought was going to be the big thing was just a lesson I had to learn, or a kind of way of, you know, showing me kind of where I wasn't being realistic about myself, or where I was kind of off the mark. And seeing that kind of development, I think, is a real motivator. I think it really puts the fire in you more, because you're like, okay, even the mistakes that I'm making have some value in this game. Like even those times that I was like so fucking pissed off because it all went wrong, that's actually been really useful now. And you're like, okay, that's pretty good. Like that's kind of a more incentive to like, keep going and keep paying attention and keep trying. Like it's awesome to see that you're doing that and that it's coming around for you. Because I think sometimes we get lost and sometimes we go, oh, it's all shit or it's all, it all sucks. But then it might click and you're like, fuck, glad I stuck around.
I think there is, I definitely have struggled with like the feeling of like putting all this stuff through into the digital sphere and just not feeling like I'm getting the feedback. In the practice, in transformative dialogue, I get the feedback. It's real. It's here. It's happening. But fucking putting yourself out there and feeling like you're just not getting traction, I think it builds a certain like hunger almost that makes you more like, okay, how can I be more fully in this?
Yeah, and it is a brutal kind of art because there is so much going on and so much out there. Like with digital stuff, you're just kind of throwing stuff out into the void a lot of the time. It has to be like something that has worked a lot for me is like thinking about what my goals are. I mean, what do I really want? Like, do I want to have a fucking billion-dollar podcast, the next Joe Rogan? I mean, that'd be sweet, but I don't think it's what I actually need at this point. Like I need a way to connect to people, to grow my audience, to meet more people, so I can invite people to my plays when I finally get to put them on after this. So I can, if I have books, I can say, hey, look, here's a book, and that I have a community that I can share the stuff that I'm doing with. And that doesn't have to be 1 million people. That doesn't have to be like a massive thing. That could be, a couple of hundred. It could be 1,000. It could be whatever. And starting to appreciate that more makes it a lot more enjoyable. Like it makes it not such a fucking like, I don't know, a painful experience of just like uploading stuff, being like, oh, this is gonna nobody cares. Why am I doing this? What's the point?
Yes, it's really good to air this because this is an experience you'll have if you produce a podcast. Is
creative anxiety,
slaving for hours editing and then uploading with a shite Berlin internet and and then it's like, what is it for? But I think it's actually that like you are the instrument and what you're putting out is your signal or your flow, and it's not about the individual artifacts so much as it is that you are becoming more of a masterful being, so that when you show up for that moment or that opportunity, whatever it is, you can be the one that's actually like there for it.
Dude, that's a fact. Like that's kind of, and because then you can't lose in a sense. It's like what you're doing is about, like I remember Tim Ferriss saying, always pick projects that even if they go completely wrong, you'll still learn something, because then you can't lose. Like it doesn't even matter if it fails or it falls apart, because I mean it does, but you'll still learn something. And like the development is the point, being the right person that can succeed when you get the opportunity, or even opening the doors to the opportunities. Like if I hadn't done the blog and podcast and stuff, I wouldn't have been able to work in the area I'm working in now. I wouldn't have been able to do, I wouldn't have any of the skills necessary to do that. And so it opens doors in ways that, and maybe in the metaverse, we'll get to have our own like, weird avatar world podcasts.
It opens incredible doors. Do not get me wrong. It really does. Even if there's even if you're not having any like financial opportunity, the opportunity to connect with like wisdom and to create personal relationships with like older people who are wiser than you and like have that be a part of your life, that's so big.
Yeah. And like I wouldn't have ever done the Dialogos or the course with Vervaeke. I wouldn't have met yourself. I wouldn't have, there's so many relationships and so many friends that I've made along the way now that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't started the podcast. And people say, that they appreciate it, or that it made them think about something, or that, and maybe that's where the internet's going. I think, it doesn't have to be maybe that's the kind of cultural thing as well, that it's like actual connections with people and not just, status and success. And I'm not knocking that. I mean, I think that's, a significant part of it also. Like, I want to be the best at what I do, and I want to be, as capable as possible. But there's just a lot more to it than I thought there was, to be honest, like way more. And it's something that if people have that itch, they should pursue. I've said that to my friends. I was like, if you want to start a blog, or you want to start putting up your artwork on Instagram, or you want to start a podcast or something, do it. Like, do it and stick to it. And when you want to give up, don't give up. Keep going, and you'll get somewhere. You'll develop as a person, and it will change you, and you will learn things. It's it's a magical thing, like, and you can do it.
Hallelujah.
Amen, brother.
I could not tell you the amount of good things in my life that have come out of doing SENSESPACE. So it's incredible. And I want to wrap up in a few minutes, but one more juicy thought that I want to throw on your plate is that this inner cultivation, beyond the inner cultivation and beyond like the creator audience relationship, I think that there's an archetypal Knights of the Round Table, 12 disciples type thing that can occur when people are fully in on their own values, like they're fully in on them, and then coming into non-rivalrous relationship with other people. And so like an actual web of like men and women, but particularly in the context of this conversation, men coming together as men, getting in, like drawing a circle around it so that they can be like, okay, nobody's going to be expelled from this group. Now we can actually have it out and show up and work out all the conflict, and then something so much like stronger and wiser, like a collective male wisdom can emerge and just be like a source of stability in the culture that will radiate outwards.
Man, 100%, like, and renewal, and just a sense of, a feeling of connection to people that you maybe wouldn't have, like complete strangers, like that you've never met before. That's what struck me at the Dialogos thing and the Men's Development Network that I did. It was just like, I didn't know these people 20 seconds before, and then we're having the deepest conversation ever, and I feel like I know them. I feel like we're, we could keep talking like this and we'd be best friends. And you're like, what? Are we all like one real conversation away from being friends with each other? Like, is that really what is going on in the world? Like, what is everybody so pissed off about? Like, we could just, it just by that, taking that step into uncertainty, that you can form these relationships. But there just has to be that container. There has to be that circle around it that says, it's okay, and that this is what we do here. And it's amazing that you're doing that, man, and that you're giving that to other men, because like, that's the sauce. I couldn't, and I'd love to see the internet used more for that, because it brings those kind of people together. You can find that world, and maybe there's more opportunity. Well, there's definitely more opportunity. Like, if there was no internet, like, I wouldn't have come across any of these things. So I give out about the internet a lot, but maybe it's taken it the right direction in some sense with that particular craft.
with our own sense of what's important and what's real, and what's transformative.
It's
kind of psychedelic dialogue, can really
and that you can have, that everybody can do it and everybody can experience it, and that there's no age restrictions, there's no restrictions on gender or on ethnicity or on religion or whatever, like, that it's open for everybody to get into. You can do it.
You don't have to take any drugs.
No, you can if you want, but we don't encourage that. Well, maybe Jacob does, I don't know.
Oh man. It's been a lot of fun recording with you today, Mahon.
I appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Yeah. I just love talking about this stuff, and I'm really hoping. Yeah, I'm just excited to see what you do in the next year, and I see you going a long way. I think you're a very good host to bet on, and a good friend. So
thank you, sir. And I hope we get to do more stuff and continue kind of talking about this journey that we've met on, because I feel like we're working towards the same aims, and I learn a lot every time I speak with you. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. And I do see you as a leader in this sort of men's development conversation in your own little way. So,
well, I've got the black belt for a reason. So I have to do my job now for the next while. I keep creating this content. But yeah, I'll keep doing it, man. I feel like it's making a difference to me and to people who listen and people who I know. So we'll keep doing it.
Please do. All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it, brother.